So let's talk about 10 surprisingly toxic things parents can say to their kids that can actually have a huge impact on their attachment style. And I think after watching this video, you'll probably never see your childhood exactly the same way again because words have a huge impact, oftentimes in unexpected ways. And I think it's really important before we dive into these 10 major features to recognize that so much of what hurts us as individuals is relative to our individual perception based on our programming and based on our needs. So I'm just going to give you a quick example here to illustrate this, and then we'll dive into the 10. If you can imagine an anxious person in a relationship and an avoidant person in a relationship, right? The person who doesn't really want commitment, who needs a lot of space and time, and the person who can be needy or clingy because of abandonment trauma in relationships. If you imagine that, the avoidant person doesn't call the anxious person back, that anxious person is going to be so distressed, right? Worried, panicked, or am I getting abandoned? What happened to them? Are they okay? Going down the rabbit hole of all those sort of worst case scenario fears. But on the other hand, if you see an anxious, preoccupied person not call a dismissive, avoidant person back as an attachment style, then you'll probably see instead that the dismissive avoidant feels relieved, right? Feels like, oh, thank goodness I don't have to talk on the phone. So I think it's really important to recognize that words will land differently for each individual. And at the same time, words, actions, all these different things based on needs and based on different individual fears that we have, right? As illustrated in that example. But I think it's at the same time really important to recognize that there are also objectively unhealthy things that we can be said, that we can be spoken to in specific ways, or that we can be communicated to that will land in a painful way for pretty much any child. So some hidden and surprising ones probably exist in here, probably some light bulb moments. And as usual, I'll be saving the best one or two for last. So first and foremost, one of the most common ones is "you're bad." There's a huge difference between being told as a child, "you are bad," versus "you did something bad." "Hey, you made a mistake. That behavior isn't good. That behavior is unhealthy. Let's explore it together." Instead of saying, "Hey, you're bad. What's wrong with you? Why did you do that?" So we can sort of put like "you're bad" and "what's wrong with you" into the same category here. And, I think it's really important to recognize, as small as that may seem from parent to child, there's an "I am bad" core wound that is very common amongst many individuals. And that "I am bad" core wound usually comes from being communicated to in a way where when you have an unhealthy behavior, you're told that you are the behavior. You are bad because of the behavior. It's who you are at your core, it's your character. Instead of, "Hey, that behavior was a mistake," and being able to separate out those two. Number two, a huge one that you'll see here, which is sort of the very obvious ones, right? And I know that there's many people who've been in very verbally and sometimes even physically abusive households. But things like "you're a disappointment," "you'll never amount to anything," "don't be stupid." I mean, there's the obvious ones. I'm just going to put that one under this category because you can see how that would deeply and profoundly impact a child's self-esteem, especially because children at a very young age and throughout their early lives, they really look up to their parents, right? They see their parents as sort of these gods in a way, these people who know everything, and we put them on a huge pedestal. And so those really unhealthy things can have a massive impact on what a child grows up to believe about themselves at a subconscious level. And the more repeated these things are, the more repetition there is, the more deep the programming is. In other words, if we're constantly told we'll never amount to anything, and that makes us feel negatively every time that we're told that, well, the firing and wiring of that experience is going to cause you to derive that as a part of your identity. It's going to be a program about who you believe yourself to be or how you believe your future to be in the world. And, things like, "oh, you're a disappointment," or "don't be stupid," there's core wounds that get developed out of being told these different things. So there's obviously a massive impact there. And some of the most common core wounds that I'll see, these big pieces of meaning that we have about ourselves, are things like, "I am stupid," "I'm not good enough," "I'm unworthy," "I'm unsafe in the world because I can't do anything," "I'm incapable." So we can really adopt these ideas and it can have a massive impact. Number three, this is one of the hidden ones. "You're just like XYZ." And XYZ could be Uncle Bob in the sort of, the family affair that you get together around every year. It could be somebody who, it could be you're just like your father and your parents are divorced, or you're just like your brother who's the black sheep of the family. And I think the implication here is that although that may sound like something small, if you know that your parent strongly dislikes the person that they are comparing you to, and they're saying, oh, you're just like so and so, this can actually cause you, because our subconscious mind is actually an association making machine, it will cause you to associate yourself with that person. And obviously, in the context that those sorts of statements are being used, is not to highlight that person's positive qualities, but to highlight their more exclusively negative qualities. When somebody's saying, like, oh, you're just like your uncle, and you know that that person is constantly fighting with their uncle, and maybe they see the uncle as selfish or mean or cruel, well, you're wise enough as a child to associate, oh, then my parent must think that I'm mean and selfish and cruel like this person. And these sorts of things can actually have a massive impact. They're quite unhealthy to be communicating in that sort of household and dynamic. Number four, another hidden one that is very, very common, and I think really needs to be addressed, is you're too sensitive, right? And it can be you're too sensitive, or it can even be things like, oh my gosh, big girls don't cry, or oh my gosh, stop crying, be a man, or grow up, right? And these kinds of dynamics or conversations that are had in regards to emotions really give us feedback about how we come to see our emotions and the relationship we build to our own emotions themselves. Now, here's why this is super important. Your emotions are a natural part of your inner self. They are a bodily function. You are born to emote, just like you were born to eat, sleep, drink water, go to the bathroom. Like, these are actually one of our normal functions that we were biologically born with. And our emotions are actually designed to give us feedback about what feels right for us or wrong for us, what feels healthy or unhealthy, what hurts us, what inspires us. Like, our emotions are a really precious gift, giving us feedback about ourselves, allowing us to really get to know ourselves and our truth. So when we disconnect from our emotions because we get messaging that our emotions are bad or shameful or make us weak in some way, we associate that natural part of ourselves as being bad or embarrassing. It's like saying, the fact that you have to drink water every day is, oh, that's a bad thing. You're too sensitive. Time to grow up. Big girls don't do that. Like, if these are the kinds of messages you get, you're actually being taught to associate negative qualities, negative aspects of self with these inherent parts of who you are. And it also causes you to disconnect from these things, which actually stops you from getting the feedback that you often need from your own inner world. So that can be a huge one. Number five, body commentary. So I'm putting this as sort of its own whole category, but if there's a lot of commentary around somebody's body growing up, oh, you're getting chubby, oh, you're too skinny, or even things like, oh, that's embarrassing, don't wear that out, that looks bad. If there's a lot of body commentary, or even if there's a parent who gives themselves a lot of body commentary in front of a child, and will actually condition the child, because we get conditioned through repetition and emotion to hyper focus on their own body's flaws, right? On their own body's downsides that they're seeing, and can cause this person to internalize that into sort of a body shaming cycle. So there is a lot of, if there's body commentary direct from parent to child, I've seen a lot of cases in my personal practice where I would see clients come in and they would, hold on to one specific memory at, 9 years old, where the parents said one thing. And, a couple of years after that, they kept being very obsessed with their body image and then proceeded to develop an eating disorder as a teenager. I've seen many, many cases like that. So I do think it's important to raise awareness to this. And also, if there's a parent who's constantly commenting on their own body, constantly shaming themselves in front of the child will mirror. Children learn through mirroring up to quite, into their adolescence. We technically do this pretty much our whole lives to some degree, but it's especially strong in our, childhood years and early teenage years. And so if you constantly see this is getting sponged up into the child, and you'll see that the child is likely to follow down those same sorts of paths. Our next one is a more obvious one. You always mess everything up. If you hear things like, oh, you always mess everything up, or, oh my gosh, you're taking so much of my time, or, oh, stop being annoying. If there's any sort of messaging where the child is made to feel like a burden, then these sorts of things can play a massive impact as well. And it can actually cause somebody to be afraid to ask others for support or help. As they grow older, they can be afraid to rely on other people or open up to people. They can be afraid to receive and can actually block themselves from receiving things like compliments or kind gestures or support from other family or friends because they associate that if I receive too much, then I'll be a burden, I'll be annoying, I will be abandoned because people will think I'm too much. Like all of these different sort of offshoots of this may become something that take place. And, before I go into the last couple here, I'm curious to hear so far if you're noticing any of these in your childhood. And I also want to say, like, it our parents and just like the vast majority of people are doing the best they can with what is available to them, right? Our parents are in a position where they might have been conditioned this way, they might have had these sorts of things happen to them. This just might be normalized. And also I think it's important to recognize too that only in the last few years has there actually been a mainstream kind of push towards more emotional literacy and introspection in our world. And so a lot of people are just replaying these old conditioned programs. But at the same time, when we can see which things landed on us, which things affected us, which conditioned patterns we adopted because of the messaging we received in childhood, we also can then take the next steps to break free from these things, to stop using these things against ourselves. And I'll say one more thing before I get into the last three or four here, which is that it is very important to recognize that we often act as our parents did in the relationship to ourselves. I often reference to people in PDS, oh, you've become your own parent. And I mean, in the context of relationship to self, we usually, so much of our own internal dialogue is internalized dialogue. In other words, if you were constantly told, oh, you're just like so and so, you might find yourself constantly comparing yourself to that person because that was the messaging that imprinted you. And then it's become a program, and these programs run and run and run on autopilot. If you constantly were told you're too sensitive, you might judge yourself as being too sensitive every time you have emotions. You often become your parent in the way that you speak to yourself in relationship to yourself. And as long as you're doing that, these things will still affect you. When you stop doing these things, when you change these patterns within yourselves, you'll have much more distance and separation from them. And thus will be able to plug in and look and say, oh, okay, that's just somebody's way of trying to communicate something when they don't have a better way. You will find yourself taking it less personally when it's not still a running program inside of your own subconscious mind. The next thing is why can't you be more like ABC? So this is another sort of hidden one, right? You'll often see the dynamics of, well, why can't you be more like the neighbor? The neighbor is much more quiet than you. Or why can't you be more like your friend Suzanne? Suzanne doesn't end up going through these silly temper tantrums. If you are taught this at a young age, if your parents are often comparing you to others, even if they're comparing you to your siblings or to your own friends, they are going to condition you to be somebody who compares themselves to others as well, because this is the programming that you are picking up. If this is a one off, by the way, it may not be as impactful, but if this is the pattern of what you're exposed to, we end up just adopting these programs, reenacting them in the relationship to ourselves. Something that goes hand in hand with this is number 7. Sally doesn't have any issues. Look at how well she does in school. So there can be these comparisons of, why can't you be more like this person? But there can also be the comparisons of specific things. So it can be, well, Sally got an A plus. Why did you get a B plus? What's wrong with, why can't you sit down and do these things? So they can go really hand in hand, but there can be the comparison of like, why can't you be more like this person as a whole, which is going to create more of that like sense of unworthiness, like, oh, my characteristics as a person are not worthy enough. Or it can be specific things. Oh, look at how well Sally does at horseback riding, or Sally scored 2 goals, where are yours? And if you constantly get this comparison in either form, the positive or the negative, both will impact the subconscious. Another big one before we get to the last one that I think is probably one of the most important, is making promises and then not following through. You would be so surprised at how much this impacts people. I've seen so many adults working in my practice who would come into sessions and they would really have a lot of trust wounds, actually because of things like just broken promises as children, promises that parents may make take their child away for the weekend or spend some quality time with them, but then not be able to follow through. And it's the promises themselves being broken that are actually more damaging than the behavior. So, in other words, if somebody said to you, okay, we're going to spend some time together over the weekend, and then they don't, had the parent just not been able to spend time, it would have had less of a negative impact in many cases than if the parent said they would and then didn't, because incongruency and inconsistency in relationship dynamics, especially the closer ones, like with parent and child, those incongruencies breed trust wounding. So whenever somebody says something and then doesn't follow through, or what they say and what they do not match, it's actually one of the big ways that we can get trust wounds as a child. And number 10, if you are only given love for what you do instead of who you are. In other words, if you're constantly being told, good job, A plus, let's go get ice cream, or A plus, I'm going to give you a hug or a high five or attention or compliments. But if you don't get those compliments for no reason, then you learn that I am only worthy of love when I achieve. And this can actually create a lot of perfectionist or really strong achievement sort of challenges in a person's adult life, where they may struggle with perfectionism to the point of analysis paralysis, or getting stuck in freeze mode as a nervous system mode of being when someone's really afraid. And it sounds funny, but one of the fundamental things you'll learn in regards to creating a secure attachment is to give a child love for no reason. So if you give a child love because they're sitting in the corner coloring, or they're sitting over in the corner watching television, and you can give a child a hug or a compliment, or some of your presence or time or attention, just because, this actually, the just because component of it actually conditions a child to feel like they are worthy of love as they are. But if we have an absence of that, and then we have a big focus on giving a child love only when they got the good grade, only when they were performing at track or horseback riding or whatever it might be, then in the absence of that, in the absence of the love for no reason, and in the focus of love on these particular things, this is where we will tend to see challenges and pain points, especially around the I am unworthy core wound that a lot of people may struggle with. So, with that being said, I think it's really important to recognize that part of healing this is all about us ending the reenactment of the internal dialogue that we have in the relationship to ourselves, trying to think towards ourselves differently. Even if you wanted to take a couple steps here, I would highly advise writing out where you do these things in the relationship to yourself. So, where you speak to yourself in a similar way, behave to yourself in a way that you were acted towards, and write a solution next to it. What will I do instead next time? Instead of shaming myself for my emotions, maybe I'll try listening to them and trying to gather, okay, what feedback are my emotions giving me right now? What do I need to feel better? Or if I catch myself being really hard on myself when I make a mistake because I was, criticized a lot for having made mistakes growing up, how will I be kinder to myself? Like, how can I focus on being for the solution, like learning from the mistake instead of just beating myself up for the mistake? And so the more we can make a strategy for reorganizing this and break these patterns, it's actually the repetition and emotion of new patterns, while divesting from these old patterns, that has the capacity to actually fire and wire new neural networks as old ones atrophy over time. And this will allow us to then end up in a different position where we don't carry these programs with us any longer. And then we are much less likely to take them personally when somebody around us enacts them, if they still do. So if you want to do a deeper dive, you can absolutely check into the Emotional Mastery and Belief Reprogramming course. It's all about how to reprogram the subconscious mind, or our sort of toolkit called 21 Ways to Reprogram Your Subconscious Mind. You are more than welcome to dive into that. And that is it for and you can dive in for free for 7 days using the link below, by the way. And that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you're enjoying this channel, please consider subscribing, liking, sharing, hit the thumbs up button or the notification bell so you don't miss any of our daily videos. And with that being said, I look forward to seeing you in future videos. Thank you so much for being here.